The digital transition. The Digital Transition, a podcast series created to assist those tasked with implementing digital strategies, where we will share our knowledge and experiences to support you in your transition. Welcome to the Digital Transition, podcast number 24. I'm your host, Nathan Hildebrandt, and today I'm chatting with Bryan McSweeney from the Department of Transport and Main Roads, or TMR. Now, this is an agency of the Queensland Government, and I wanted to try and get an update on their digital transition journey. But before I talk to Bryan, I need to talk to you a little bit about our exclusive sponsor, NBS. So their NBS Chorus product, it enables collaborative management of your specification directly from the cloud, and it's directly linked to your building model. Now, this allows you to increase productivity and reduce risk with a single point of truth. And there's not really any other products on the market here in Australia that has that connectivity and access to your BIM model. Now, to learn more about NBS and NBS Chorus, please head over to their website, www.thenbs.com.au. So now on with the show. Thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us today, Bryan.
You're welcome, Nathan. It's always a pleasure.
Now, firstly, Bryan, you know, people that are located here in Queensland and frequenting Brisbane or even doing work with TMR, they'd be reasonably well familiar with who you are. But for those that are listening today, can you enlighten us and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Nathan. Yes, I guess in today's environment, I'm a bit of an anomaly, mate. I've been working for Transport and Main Roads in its various forms since about 1972, so about ticking over 48 years at this particular point in time. Began my career as a road design draftsman in Roma back in those days. Sort of transitioned up to Cairns for a while, came back to Brisbane about 1980, worked in the department's highway planning and design branches, and then transitioned into the CAD systems area, where I started playing with computer software applications, road design software applications, back in the Unix Sun workstation days. So very early on in that sort of space before the PC really became popular with how we were doing things. After the sort of on the tools work, I've performed a number of roles in leadership in the department, including manager of a design services group in road tech consulting, as it was, which is fairly similar to any of the engineering consulting firms that are out there today. Then moved into actually being manager of the design systems area, delivering the ICT and CAD related road design software applications across the department. And then moved into a role of what we termed manager of the road design capability group, which was really about setting qualification requirements and competency framework for our road designers. So when we recruit them in, they come in with an engineering qualification, but then we do a little bit of that training that turns them into a road designer. So in that sense also, I am actually an engineering associate fellow with Engineers Australia and was lucky enough to be a recipient of their National Engineering Associate Award back in 2013, Nathan. So been around in the business for quite some time. But narrowly in the road design space.
Well, that's a very linear answer, isn't it? But 2 years off a golden jubilee, you know, that's an impressive place to stay for a career, you know, and seeing the change in a department must be, or an agency as they're called now, would be quite interesting. Now, instead of being TMR, in terms of the real words for what it's called, it's the Department of Transport and Main Roads here in Queensland. It's obviously a very large agency of the Queensland State Government. It certainly is. Can you explain to the listeners the areas that TMR are actually responsible for?
Okay. That's a big ask, I guess, but having been around for some time, I've got a bit of a feel for what happens in other divisions. So let's just try and run through them for you. Obviously, for those who don't know, the department's strategic vision is to create a single integrated transport network accessible to everybody, and that's certainly what our DG certainly puts out in the marketplace whenever he's talking. Now, to underpin that, obviously, we've got, if you think about the general customer services and safety and regulations branches, so obviously customer services are those areas that look after licensing and registration. Most people would be aware of that. But we've also got a maritime safety and a land transport safety and regulation branch that underpins the operations in those two particular areas. We've got TransLink, which focuses on, for those who aren't aware, the public transport network here in Queensland, both for bus and rail. We've got a policy planning and investment branch that focuses on getting the dollars from Treasury for supporting what we term the Q-Trip program. So our infrastructure spend comes from Treasury dollars. Our policy planning and investment unit is the area of the department that pulls all of that Q-Trip program together to make sure that we've got a program of works every financial year. We've got a corporate division that underpins just the general running of the business. I mean, the sorts of things around human resources, finance and procurement. It also has our internal information technology services group and a couple of governance and internal audit functionality in there. And then the area that I work in is the infrastructure management and delivery, which has 4 branches under it. One is road tech, so we still do have a commercial building arm in transport and main roads. We're still running the new generation rolling stock, so they've come in now with the new trains, obviously, and how they're being rolled out across the network. Program delivery and operations is generally where we sit with the issuing of tendering or internal design of our road network. So if we're not engaging external consultants to do that work, we do have a small cohort internally that does delivery and operations of road transport infrastructure projects. And the area that I actually work in is engineering and technology. Now, it's an area that generally sat around technical policy standards and guidelines that sort of put the framework around how, say, areas like PD&O would actually operate. And obviously that's there where I've come into this now in trying to define, what the BIM implementation strategy may look like for TMR and how do we then roll that out across the business. So yeah, quite a big organisation, Nathan.
A lot of different pieces of the puzzle, but I guess as you said, it ties all the way back to trying to achieve that one major objective in terms of connectivity for the residents of Queensland and visitors to Queensland. Last year, I did have a conversation with Colin Mann from PCSG about the work that he had been doing with TMR. And, it's good talking to, both sides of the story. I was talking to a consultant that was consulting to you at the time, but it's always really good to have the conversation with the client representatives, people that are the stakeholders and the ones that are actually doing this stuff day to day in terms of getting the information, from the horse's mouth, but more so getting it from the person that is actually going to make the most impact. Now, over the last couple of years, through case studies that I've seen in presentations and industry events, there have been a number of pilot projects that have been delivered by industry for TMR. Now, were they in response to the Department of Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning's State Infrastructure Plan that was released in March 2016, or were they because of other reasons, agency needs?
A good question, in actual fact, because while we're sort of running those pilot projects now, that is a culmination of quite a body of work that we've actually been doing in the department, probably since about 2013. Mm-hmm. BIM in itself, I guess, has sort of come into the organisation as far back as 2009. So we have actually, because we've been doing that 3D modelling component of roadways since then, BIM started creeping in as a terminology back in 2009. Dropped away for a considerable period of time, re-emerged, I think, around about 2013. And that was a conversation that was started actually by our industry partners, would you believe, who had come back to us as an organisation saying, at the moment, this is what we're delivering for you, but there are other things that we can do. So we started that conversation with industry partners. I think 2014, there was a Productivity Commission inquiry, a report into public infrastructure, and there was a recommendation that came out of that spoke about BIM implementation and including, BIM into the procurement guidelines and other things from probably that was more the federal government arrangement.
Yep.
For us in the department, our first exposure to it, first foray would have been, in actual fact, the new generation rolling stock project site out at Wookaraka near Ipswich. some of the people that we've been talking to, and you would probably know, were originally involved in some of that work. It went through and saw BIM deployed in early stages of concept design and right through to construction. Another one that actually it's interesting with the big explosion over in Beirut at the moment. 2014, there was a crash out Angelala Creekway out around Charleville, where a truck carrying some ammonia nitrate had actually crashed into a creek. Luckily enough, the driver had managed to get out of the truck. Some emergency services people had turned up on site with a big fire truck and everything. And would you believe they were standing behind that vehicle when the ammonia nitrate actually exploded and blew up the Angelala Creek Bridge? So that was, again, sort of another starting of a foray for us around about 2014 of getting into there. When industry approached us, we started chairing a TMR, an industry working group on BIM, which has morphed into what you see now, I guess today, as the Queensland BIM working group. So in that sense, we were actually part of the development of the guidelines that DILGIP has put out there in 2016. So yeah, a long journey for us. Still there. I guess we had the National Digital Engineering Working Group phase in there for a period of time, led by, I think it was Simon Bowe from Transport for New South Wales. That seems to have disappeared from the landscape at the particular point in time and has now taken over. I think there's a cohort of treasurers or something that may be looking at BIM implementation on a national agenda, but we haven't seen much of it up here in TMR.
Yeah, well, it demonstrates then that I guess there were some efficiencies that you were achieving in those early pilot projects that you were, industry kind of responding and saying how we can deliver greater value, that then, formalized itself more so in that infrastructure plan that was developed by DILGIP at the time. But at the time, when you were doing those pilot projects, throughout obviously the last decade, was there a specific focus of those pilot projects, or was it less that, before things became more formalized with the policy that's out now in terms of digital enablement policy that came out in 2018, was there a formal approach to the outcomes you were trying to achieve with the pilot projects, or was it just, the industry demonstrating what capability that industry had, and then, it opened opportunities for TMR?
I think that's exactly the way it was. It was certainly industry driving it from that perspective in the early days. The release of the state infrastructure plan did formalise how we were then engaging. So we're actually coming out and using terminology of BIM implementation into the project and trying to write into the contractual arrangement some of those things that we were looking for. And very early days for us. So, I'd be the first to admit that we were very BIM light, say in some of those first projects that started to roll out. We were really using them to do a bit of a gap analysis. As I mentioned, we've been doing string-based modelling for a considerable period of time. And for people who don't understand that, if you think about a road alignment, the centre line, for example, can be defined by an alignment that defines horizontal and vertical geometry. And then from that, we would hang off edge strings for curb and channel, and then batter strings take us down to the natural surface. So we were defining strings that created a 3D model of the constructed roadway, or the roadway that was to be constructed, but in that linear sense. And we were able to feed that into machinery guidance systems. So you'll see a lot of the major construction machinery with their GPS locators, the little white aerial sitting up on the side there that sort of tells them where they are. So it was, to some degree, driving, say, the blade of a grader. You have to have this depth of fill or cut, and that's what we're getting out of our 3D models. The step change for us now is obviously moving into object-based models and the intelligence that we can put to those objects in these models. So that's the change for us, I guess, and that's really what we're doing through these early pilots, was trying to identify what is the gap, what are we changing, what do we need to be focusing on to achieve these better outcomes through the project.
So initially, the 3D model through the design phase was driving benefits for maybe more quicker and more accurate construction because of the fact that the machines were guided by information that was being fed to them from the software tools in terms of saying, cut to this point. Whereas before, in the past, they'd be cutting and a surveyor would be running around with the electronic dumpy level, and you hear the nice beep, beep, beep when they hit the right level. That's the first efficiency gain.
Exactly right.
Now, moving forward, that's an obvious benefit from construction. And, it is still very early days, in terms of trying to identify, found or achieve benefits that you would have from your pilot projects in regards to construction and maintenance. Has there been any, I wouldn't say significant because, it's very early days now, but have you found any benefits as an asset manager? Well, your role is in asset management, but in terms of, has TMR at this stage seen any benefits of changing from that string-based construction benefit to the, an object-based asset management base?
Probably not so much in the projects we're running. What we are seeing is it's being demonstrated to us that we can be provided with that information. So what I'm seeing at the moment is we are actually getting the 3D object-based models with attributes assigned to objects in those models. The trick for us now is learning how to extract that from those models and put it into the asset management systems. We've managed to demonstrate that certainly in the bridge space, where we've got a very mature naming convention for every object within a bridge build.
Yep.
And the attributes that we want to know about those objects. And we've been able to extract that, at least getting it out into a tabular format that could possibly feed into our asset management systems down the track. So that has sort of been proven to us. We know that we can do that now. It's really now about getting the technology to do that in the most efficient way.
So that's a really interesting point. So therefore, as an asset owner, you may find that this object-based element model may have great value for certain assets, but then other assets may not be so important. And I guess that's a really key thing for asset owners to kind of understand moving forward, that sometimes a model has great value, but then, in others, maybe for, basic highway construction, that, that string line and the model demonstrating, thicknesses of the various substrates might be adequate.
Well, exactly right. And to that degree, we're still running in parallel. We are still providing that string-based model to the contractor to build. What I'm really focusing on is the deliverable of an as-constructed object-based model back to me at the end of the day that will feed information into the asset management systems. I mean, that was... In reality, that was the major issue that we were facing. Our ability to capture as constructed information from a red line markup of a 2D drawing coming back into the department sometime after the project had been finished was really the major issue that we're looking at, because then we would have to have somebody interrogate those drawings. And you can imagine on some of these projects, there are thousands of drawings that they have to go through and try and extract the asset management information and physically type it into an asset management database. So what we're really looking to do in that digital transition piece of getting back the asset information in an object-based model that we can extract digitally and then place it straight into the asset management systems is going to be a huge benefit for us when we get it working as well as what we believe it can be.
And the difference being that as an asset owner or a client, you can specify the information that you need and the format that that information should be in for each of the different asset types that are part of that as constructed delivery, which then saves you a considerable amount of time in, manually entering that data yourself. People just have to do a drive down the, and this is probably Energex's space rather than TMRs, but, all the light poles, for example, I don't know, the light poles yours or Energex?
They're ours, mate, and we pay for the power.
So therefore, all of those poles that have asset identifiers or numbers on them, that obviously there's a reason for that's your, an ID that's used by maintenance teams or people that you've asked to go and, rectify, we've got a fault on this light pole, for example, go to it. And it's written on
exactly right.
And the poor people at the end of the project would be manually probably typing that into a system right now, or maybe not right now, but maybe in the past.
Yes, it certainly was. So we've made some advances in the digital space. Probably not so much in the modelling, but that's one of the data sets that we've got three major information data sets for us. It's the civil roads, the bridges, and then the ITS&E. And you're right, these databases have got a lot of information in it. And I'll go back to a point you raised earlier. We still need to weed out what is valuable and what is not in that information data set, because we could capture a lot of information about these assets that isn't necessarily valuable for us then as an asset maintainer.
And it's going to be something that it's almost like an ISO 9001 scenario where you're going to be progressively understanding more and more about how you can get benefits out of having certain information sets for different assets. So it's not something that any asset owner is ever going to be able to resolve in one take. It's going to be a continual improvement and adjustments as you go. So it's each project you're going to learn something new, and it's not really the construction phase. It's actually going to be when you're maintaining it and saying, "Oh, why isn't that information attached to that? I need it. I need it for this purpose."
Yes.
Moving on to, as you're an agency of the Queensland State Government, obviously in November 2018, they did release the principles for BIM implementation. That was the policy that's applicable across all the government agencies in Queensland for projects over $50 million in value at this stage, and then moving into 2023 where it may apply to all assets dependent upon the business case. Has that policy, obviously you'd been doing some work previous to this policy being implemented and adopted by government as a whole, has that policy impacted the way in which TMR currently delivers their projects at all, or has it been a minor transition?
Certainly wouldn't see it as a major contributor, but what it has done is it's certainly brought into focus the need for us as a department to ensure that our approach is aligned to that government policy. So certainly the principles outlined in the document, as most would be aware if they've had the opportunity to have a read, it talks about being managed, effective, open and supportive. So from that perspective, internally, I've looked at 4 work streams that I'm trying to drive as an implementation manager. And what I'm doing is aligning the work streams, and for me, it's information requirements. And you spoke about that earlier. I mean, that is the key piece for us. If we're going to do this well as a client organisation, we really do need to know what information requirements we have as an organisation around our assets. And to me, that's the managed component. We know what we need to know, and now we're trying to build into the modelling process how we capture that information. Sitting under that, then I've got processes and documentation, which is really looking at, there are many guidelines that we write in TMR internally and externally for people saying this is how we do things. We've got, we actually did publish a very light TMR BIM guideline back in 2017. I'm looking to bring that out now with a bit more focus on ISO 19650 and NatSpec processes, but it talks about how we then give some guidance to people about what TMR is looking for. Certainly then into contractual documentation. For us, we run a number of different contract types. First, obviously, is engagement of the engineering consultants to do the design. So there's a particular suite of contract documents that we have for that. And I'm trying to write the BIM, or not trying to, have written some BIM clauses into those documents so that we engage the engineering consultants. So they know what I'm looking for, or TMR is looking for as a deliverable. Then into the construction side, we've got what we call TICCO, which is Transport Infrastructure Contract Construct Only, who takes that design from the engineering consultants and now builds it. Or alternatively, we're into a D&C, which has a whole suite of scope of works technical criteria documents in there that, again, I've written BIM clauses into so that they understand the contractual arrangement that we're looking for in those types of contracts. So that's through effective BIM, through the processes, documentation, publication we're putting out there. Open obviously relates to technology. So some of the software applications out there, how are we trying to be as open as we possibly can in what we're asking for as a deliverable, given that we still have internally our own applications and systems that need to consume this information. And I guess that's why we've made the choice to head down the industry foundation class open file source direction to say, I'm not too concerned about what application you may use to develop the design in, but what I will be asking for as a deliverable back to TMR will be, give me that file in its native file format and also an industry foundation class, so that I can try and then bring that back into the applications that we use internally in TMR to manage our road design. And then obviously, I think the one that we all keep forgetting about is people and capability. How are we going to do, certainly for us as a large, you heard how large our organisation is, and BIM goes across a number of those different divisions. So how I bring the change management into TMR to say, here's the change in process that we're looking, contract administrators, project managers, internal designers. There are many little streams that I need to get into in TMR to actually start to build some of that capability in people internally, but also educating industry about what our requirements are so that they know where the skill development needs to happen within their organisations to meet TMR's requirements.
It's a challenging one. And each day I keep talking to different people. I spend myself a lot of time talking to people about BIM and what it's all about and what it really means. And, when you look at ISO 19650, all it is, and at the moment, TMR, before any of this BIM stuff existed, you would have had CAD standards, and each of the as constructed documents had to be on certain layers and certain line types and certain title blocks and certain naming standards for the drawings. And all this is now is just a more refined set of standards of how information is to be delivered at the end of the project or throughout the project to enable business decisions to be made throughout the design and construction process. So then, you can see whether it's feasible still or whether it's going to be appropriate. And then once it's in operation phase, the information's there to enable more efficient and effective operation and maintenance of those assets. So reality of it is that it's just a client being, the documents you're talking about, it's about a client being more descriptive of how they want things done instead of sitting there and just saying, a conversation I had with someone earlier today in a meeting was all about, we were sitting down having a coffee and he'd had a juice. And I said, well, today what we're seeing with clients is they're just asking for a bottle of juice. And what we actually want to do now is say, well, what flavor is that juice? And what size is that juice? What size bottle of juice do you want and what flavor is it? And what fruit makes up that fruit juice? And that's all that BIM really is a client not just being ambiguous and saying, I need as constructed information. It's saying, I'd like as constructed information and this is how I'd like it structured and this is the format that I want it in. And it's really good to hear that government agencies are starting to take those steps to actually have a good understanding of what those components are, because then industry gets a better understanding of how they can then build their workflows around meeting clients' needs and benefiting clients rather than just working on their own ways and standards of doing things. Would have been nearly 18 months ago. Well, it would have been 16 months ago when I interviewed Colin regarding the work that they were doing with TMR. How is the journey going in regards to, obviously there's key areas with change management when it comes to having digital processes with models and stuff and the like, and having digital information rather than relying on PDF manuals and the like. How are you going around the key change areas around technology, standards and people? Has it been a challenge so far, or is it, moving smoothly, or like everything when it comes to scenarios with change management around digital enablement, it's a long road and you're making your way along it in a slow and steady pace?
That's probably the way we're working at the moment. We have got a program of work. So for us, and certainly in the technology space, we have to abide by Treasury requirements if we're spending dollars on ICT projects. And there are a number of gates that we need to go through. And one is, first of all, standing up the project. And certainly the work that we were doing with Colin and PCSG was around what does our common data environment need to look like? To some degree, as a client organisation, I need to figure out where that CDE fits within a number of different systems that already exist in TMR. Now, if I go out to consulting organisation, I'll say, what's your CDE? They will name a particular product that they're using. And I'm going, well, that's fine. That demonstrates to me that you've got a project management or a quality management capability within the software technologies that you're using. But when I try and bring that back into TMR, it's going, I have a funding arrangement set up in what we term 3PCM, which is our portfolio program and project management application sitting at the front end, which is where those treasury dollars come in. So a project starts in that space. At the back end, I've got an asset management system waiting to receive the information that we get back post-construction. So for me, the work we're doing with Colin is trying to identify what applications and what processes do we need to have that fit between those two polar opposites, and define applications that can provide the functionality that I need, that will provide information firstly back upstream to the funding allocated to say we're spending the dollars in a responsible manner and here's the achievements that we're managed to pull out of it, but also saying to the asset management, here is the information that has now come through from a new construction build, of feeding that information into those asset management systems. Got a considerable project to work. At the present time, we've been out with a request for industry to tell us what functionality they are able to provide us as an organisation. We got about 21, 22 responses, so very mature in some areas across industry about what's actually out there. We're at what we term now as working down into an area that we'll talk about readiness for market. So we will use the information that we've gathered through the work that we've done with PCSG to refine what we term the functional specifications of what we want the CDE to achieve. And when some of the situations that we're currently facing with COVID and funding arrangements and all of those sorts of things that are starting to impact, we do have a program where we come back out to industry with an invitation to offer. So that's where we're at. We're at that stage now where we've got a fairly good handle on what we believe we need to procure. It's simply now looking at those external impacts that may sort of stall that process for us. But we do have a program of works fairly well defined that takes us through to implementation of the CDE.
And it's challenging because industry obviously have well aware of how they work and operate and function as a business, but there's not many organisations that manages many assets as the likes of TMR. When you think about the scale and enormity of it, when you're covering, 2,500 kilometres in length and about 1,500 width or something.
Mate, 33,000 kilometres state-controlled road network, 3,100 bridges, if I'm in the right ballpark there. So you're right. It's a considerable length of asset that we've got out there at the particular point in time.
Yeah. So
that's really what we're trying to manage as an organisation. Yep.
And it demonstrates the need for it to be done, slow and steady, because rushing into anything in regards to trying to change and upend probably systems and processes that are probably reasonably well managed at this stage, and just tweaking, I guess, and trying to find optimizations that you can achieve through, implementing these minor changes.
Well, it's certainly around the connectivity of those applications inside an organisation. So there are some that we see from industry partners where connectivity doesn't seem to be an issue, but as a client organisation where we have in-house applications that we're trying to now plug some of these systems into, that's really where I'm relying on my information technology branch within TMR to help us do some of that work.
That's a massive challenge within itself, and I don't even want to delve into the challenges of trying to manage a model asset and how you would break that up, because you turn around and go, well, let's run this roads in 1 kilometre chains and maintain that one piece of model. But then you'd end up where the junctions didn't work out, and then you do maintenance work on and upgrade models for certain bits. We don't even want to start touching that today. We could be talking for hours and hours about the endless possibilities of how that would work. And that in itself, yes. maybe I encourage people to reach out to you if they want to try and solve that problem for you. But this is obviously a long journey, and you experience so much change, over 48 years through your role in TMR. Are there any kind of key lessons, that aren't kind of specific IP that TMR would like to maintain and hold? But are there key lessons that I think that you've learned that could be reasonably good takeaways for other asset owners looking to implement digital processes into their organisation?
I think, the key one is to understand your end goal. Where are we going with this? Why are you doing BIM implementation? Sorry, I'll come back to, is it Simon Sinek? You continually quote at us from time to time. Who says, understand the why. But that is key. That is really, we don't do things just for the sake of doing them. We need to understand exactly what we're trying to achieve. And to that extent, it comes back to the comment you made earlier. As a client organisation, when we're engaging others to do that work, we have to clearly define to them what we need or what we want as a deliverable at the back end of the day. So certainly from my perspective, don't underestimate the amount of effort required to implement, BIM. You don't just go and buy BIM off a shelf. There's a considerable amount of effort that is required. And I guess the benefit for us, if we go back to the state infrastructure plan, at least they had a bit of vision there to say BIM implementation by 2023. So that's sort of the mantra that I keep running as well. I try to, I guess, just pace everybody to say we still have a bit of time. Don't try and jump into it now and make mistakes. Let's make sure we're getting the right processes in the right place at the right time and still target that 2023 implementation date.
Yeah, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. I guess the other thing is that 2023 is implementing of BIM, but what is that? And that could be, the first steps that you take, and then you're always going to continually improve. You might just have it'll be placeholder A in terms of the current needs that you think you as an organisation may fit in, and how you feel about that.
Yep.
I guess one kind of key question, and it goes back to your comments in regards to the extent of your asset and asset base and the mixture of the asset base. One of the questions I asked Colin, I have to ask you as well, because to me, this is a fundamental piece to another puzzle, is that the challenges that TMR face is that they own certain assets, and your local authority or your councils all over Queensland also own and then manage and maintain linkages between that massive web. So there's always going to be an interaction between TMR assets and local authority assets. Has there been many discussions yet between TMR and local authorities about this potential capability and where you're heading? And, is there much interest from the local authorities yet about investigating and aligning their digital processes with TMR?
We've certainly had the conversations with some of the local government authorities, particularly so I would say here around Brisbane, where we've been sort of working on projects in conjunction with Brisbane City Council. Logan City Council's had some conversations with us. I haven't seen much outside of the southeast corner, and I don't get the opportunity to travel that often out of here either. But I mean, we've always had local government authorities as part of the build in TMR. We're always connecting to those networks, so they're there. In a BIM sense, I guess we've seen work that they have been doing that generally sat around what was termed an ADAC classification of object element definitions. So as designed, as constructed, in a similar vein to what we're doing with BIM. So I've actually spoken at one of the Institute of Public Works Engineers Australia Queensland Division forums at some stage, and we've had some really good discussions with individuals from different local councils down here. I think we're both trying to see how things are moving in the BIM space. I don't know how mature the ADAC or the uptake of ADAC across a number of different local government councils is, but in my mind, it's a similar sort of thing that we're trying to achieve. So there is a lot of synergy between what they're currently doing and what we are doing as well. And we're seeing some individuals from those organisations who are, attending the same sort of forums that we attend to understand, how would they look at BIM implementation. And I've delivered presentations, at such venues at Logan City Council, for example, have always been keen.
It'd be nice to see them embrace that. And, at this point in time, the focus is on, creating a system for asset management. But it would be interesting to then kind of, and these are the terms that I kind of get frustrated by, but I'm going to mention them: a digital twin and smart cities, and they're terms that I kind of, as much as there are people within industry that are, highly involved in researching and developing concepts around those, that, and the power of, Google Maps now, where they have that much mobile phone data, they can generate congestion estimates and times how long it's going to take.
Yep.
And I know that there are a lot of sensors that are placed along the, the Queensland Government, TMRs network.
Yep.
The ability, and I'm sure those sensors are all going back to other computer systems and existing, monitoring systems to confirm how things are all working. And, that'd be interesting to see whether or not that actually links in the future, or whether it actually is just seen as excessive and wasteful.
Okay, Nathan, I guess I don't have a great place to play in that space, but I do know that TMR is certainly opening in sharing its data. So we are on a number of open databases that are available, to the internet. and sharing that type of information more broadly outside of TMR. So there's certainly a lot of work that we've done in that space. And you're right, certainly in the Google Maps space and even internally. I mean, we're talking the BIM implementation piece. There's still a bit of work that we need to do in the GIS space, and we actually have internally, our GIS maps that allow us to interrogate different data sets. So the transformation of information from BIM to GIS is also in the mix to say, how do we then publish that information so that people, it's the portal, I guess, that we're trying to look at. What's the best way to bring that information in front of people, so that they don't have to be a computer whiz on a particular application, but use some of the other applications that are out there that are much more user friendly, if I put it in those terms.
Yeah, and we won't even start talking about how the world isn't flat either, because linear infrastructure obviously deals with all sorts of issues. That 100 meters isn't 100 meters, and we don't want to blow people's minds on that. But there's a lot of information. Hopefully, people have taken from our discussion.
Mate, I think 100 meters is pretty close.
Oh, it depends on where you measure it. I'm never going to forget that presentation I saw from John Mitchell on GIS and BIM and how inaccurate the world is because of our flat model, our flat thinking in our software. So, depending upon where you are from a certain map point and how inaccurate that can be. So let's not go there either. But Bryan, mate, I'm really appreciative for your time today and grateful to finally have a chat with you. It's been good to, put this down and be able to share this with people, across Australia and the world in terms of, getting an understanding of how people that are working and managing assets are on their journey, and that the journey doesn't take overnight. But I have the one final question for you, the one that I've been asking everyone and all the guests I have on. What does BIM mean for you?
I think, in my mind, we are starting to hopefully settle on the one that we hear most often these days, I think, which talks about BIM being better information management, mate. Anything that improves the accurate, timely capture of asset management information, particularly for a client organisation like Transport and Main Roads. Anything that gives us confidence that we're making the right decisions based on the right information as we move forward in trying to upgrade and maintain, the state controlled road network. It's got to be about the information we capture, how we store it, and then how we share and disseminate that information across the organisations. It's got to be better information management, Nathan, without a doubt.
I'm glad how well we're aligned. But
I think I've listened to too many of your podcasts, mate.
Or too many of my presentations where I keep rabbiting on about it. But it means that at least my brainwashing is working. But
yes, it is.
I'd like to thank you once again, Bryan, for your time. And for more information on the Department of Transport and Main Roads, or TMR, please head to our website for further reading. Now, I look forward to sharing our next podcast in a fortnight's time. Until then, good luck with your digital transition. For more information, or if you'd like to continue the discussion in the comments section, head over to our website, thedigitaltransition.com. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on our future podcasts. Digital transition.